Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. Every Friday the 13th, I review a different Friday the 13th sequel in chronological order, and this time I have come upon the only 90s Friday the 13th film. This is the first Friday the 13th film made by New Line after Paramount kind of let the rights go, basically. They're a little embarrassed of the series anyway, and after Jason Takes Manhattan was the lowest grossing of the series thus far, and wasn't as profitable, even though they are fairly cheap films to make, they decided to just let it go. And New Line and Paramount had been talking since about '87 about doing a Freddy vs. Jason film. And the potential Freddy vs. Jason crossover infects this part of the Friday the 13th franchise because they're not making them as regularly. And Sean S. Cunningham, who is the director of the first film, comes back as a producer, and he's just basically, this film and Jason X were both released to keep Jason in the public consciousness. He didn't really think about the quality in which he was doing that, but that was his intent. Jason Goes to Hell was supposed to be a final chapter of the original series that would eventually lead into Freddy vs. Jason. Now, this is directed by Adam Marcus. They actually offered it to Joe Dante and John McTiernan, two directors I wish had made this movie instead. I don't know why they didn't do it, or it was just a money issue, or both of them thought they were better than this franchise, all of which are fairly reasonable explanations, but Adam Marcus got this film instead, and then he would later go on to do Texas Chainsaw 3D. He kind of has a penchant for making sequels to horror movies in which they ignore all of the continuity of the previous horror movies, except for like the original, and this one he says this only counts after 2, but whatever. I've read a couple places there's a comic book and there's a book that explains the continuity and how we start off the beginning, which actually kind of ties it in a little nicer than his like, I don't know, this is like Jason, whatever, which is kind of Adam Marcus's intellectual intention on what he was doing with the Friday the 13th franchise. Sean S. Cunningham actually admitted he hadn't seen any of the Friday the 13th sequels. Why he wanted to produce them, even though he hadn't seen the 7 films between this one and the first one. This is kind of just made as a corporate idea to keep Jason hip with the kids so they still remembered who he was and also have him on the poster. This is one of the few Friday the 13th films that isn't Friday the 13th part whatever, even though this is actually the 9th entry in the franchise. It starts off and it's just kind of a typical Friday the 13th attack. This girl goes to this house near Camp Crystal Lake. She is taking a shower, and then Jason comes and tries to attack her, and as she is running, all these lights go up and the FBI comes and blows Jason the fuck up. They shoot him like a lot of times because he's Jason. And so they kill Jason, presumably, take his remains to Ohio because the FBI has stuff there. And then when the guy's examining him, his heart keeps beating because, I don't know, and then he touches his heart. I'll let that one go. The only one to touch Jason's heart. But then when the heart's beating, the heart kind of compels the guy doing this autopsy to like eat the heart. Eat your heart out, Jason. So then Jason takes over this guy, and if he sees himself in the mirror, he's Jason, but otherwise he's just like this old black guy. And so he goes to Camp Crystal Lake because that's where he belongs and kills his way all the way there. And there's this diner there that's having a 2-for-1 Jason is Dead burger special in which you can get Jason burger patties, which if anyone has the recipe or has made one of those, I would at least have one. I thought that was very funny. And Jason comes back until they find this black bounty hunter guy with a cowboy hat who has a ridiculous name, Creighton Duke, and he says he'll kill him and says a similar monologue to kind of what Robert Shaw says in Jaws, which either was intentional or shows how cliche ridden this movie is. And then this mom and her daughter, who's out of town and is dating this TV show host that's kind of involved in this film, are like the cousins or semi-distant relatives of Jason, and supposedly only they can kill Jason or bring him back through their bodies or something. That part's weird. They can actually kill Jason, so he's looking for them to destroy them so he can keep on living and being all ridiculous and unstoppable. But Jason, after he possesses the black guy autopsy, he can possess other people by doing this weird mouth, open mouth thing where this black spludge comes out of him, and then keeps transferring to bodies as he keeps terrorizing the people of Camp Crystal Lake and trying to kill his long-lost relatives before they can send him back to hell. It's important when you think about the 9th Friday the 13th film. And that we've been through a lot at this point. We've gone to Manhattan, we've fought psychic kids, he's been brought back from the dead, there was that weird Jason's not there but he's still kind of in it entry, but everybody hates this movie. It's not like a good movie. It is probably, up to this point, I've only watched up to, this is the 9th film I've watched, all of the previous 8, and this is, of them, it is the worst, certainly. But to get really upset about it, I look at this as I look at Adam Marcus's previous horrible horror movie franchise film, Texas Chainsaw 3D, in which I had incredibly low expectations for this movie. And I knew that these films were getting completely ridiculous and stupid at this point. Certainly, there are some really awful parts to it. I don't get that upset about it. I think it is horribly made. It's horribly shot. Some of the violence, it looks like he cared a lot more about directing those sequences. I understand in a Jason Friday the 13th film, when you have the parts where people are talking, it's like the parts of a Godzilla movie where Godzilla's not there, like nobody cares about them. That's fine, but you could at least give a little bit of a shit. But this guy doesn't really care, and apparently some of the dialogue was improvised according to the actors on set because they just like didn't have that much of a script, and it really shows. Adam Marcus has said the original cut was 130 minutes. That's way too long for a Friday the 13th film, and they made him cut it down to 90, acting like this movie would have been better if it was longer. That sounds like a curse worse than what happened to the people possessed by Jason. I think the thing that makes this more of the worst than like previous entries is that at least in Jason Takes Manhattan you had the cool 80s boat with all these ridiculous set pieces and characters and like a kitsch value. They all had gimmicks that kind of drew you in a way, or at least a lot better than this, because the possession thing, they weren't really that into it, and the drama between the people sometimes didn't make sense. There was the guy who was the girl's baby daddy, and then when he lost his glasses, suddenly like he didn't need them. Did he get contacts? Maybe they cut that out. Maybe there's like a really good contact scene. The thing with this movie is that you can tell they don't really care, and this is clearly like, I think Sean S. Cunningham came back because this was like probably a position he could get paid very well for. Certainly he wasn't gonna come back, but even the original was more of a roller coaster ride kind of horror movie. And when they did that well with the first one, the second one, the original final chapter one, it worked a lot better. Also, you have to think that this is a really awkward, bad time for mainstream horror. The 90s was not a particular banner decade for horror, and pre-Scream, it was even worse. This came out a year before Wes Craven's A New Nightmare, which is kind of the precursor to what he would do in Scream, which actually delayed the Freddy vs. Jason thing even further. Jason Lives had already kind of done the self-referential thing and the funnier horror film, but Jason Goes to Hell is really poorly made and has a score that's using these orchestra hits that sound like, is this a bad TV movie, or is this a porno, or is this a shitty horror film? Doesn't quite make up its mind on that one. Jason Goes to Hell didn't really have anything to hook viewers other than some pretty cool kills, which it does actually have the kills. It really looked like Adam Marcus cared about those. And I think he does better kills than I saw him do in that Texas Chainsaw film. Some of the other sequences were just so poorly directed. It really looked like it cost nothing to make, and actually this cost about $3 million. It was cheaper than the last Friday the 13th film, and it made about the same as that one, but since it cost so significantly less, made more of a profit. They both made about $15 million, and that one cost I think $5, but I think they spent a lot on marketing on that one, and this one I don't think they did. I remember when this film came out, it was like 9 or 10, and it actually came out on August 13th, 1993. So it was about 10 when this came out. I didn't really know much about Jason at that time, and I was surprised they could release a movie with a title with hell in it because I was a kid at the time. This movie has some ridiculous parts that I laughed at, like the Jason patties, like the deaths, like this weird little demon Jason baby. I like the Necronomicon reference and the Freddy reference, but it just doesn't have enough of that to make it interesting. And when you can tell the director only cares about the horror elements and nothing else, it really just rubs you the wrong way. This isn't something to get that upset about because they've changed so many things and done such weird things with the timeline already that it's kind of hard to fault them for it at this point. And they can't really just make a simple Jason goes after people movie because that's not how Friday the 13th sequels really work. They always have to have a dumb little little gimmick, and this is like, hey, it's really the final one, we're sending him to hell, even though they made 3 more after this. This is the era of ridiculous Friday the 13th films. With Manhattan, the ridiculousness takes over and you just get really poor direction. With New Blood and Jason Lives, they tried to get the ridiculousness to kind of work for them. They're earnest and honest attempts at doing that. I think that's why Jason Lives is looked at rather fondly. New Blood, not as much, but I think it was a better attempt than this one in Manhattan. They're kind of selling these films on things that they don't really have enough of. This film probably had as much Jason as the last film had Manhattan. You see these people getting possessed by Jason. I guess let's do the possession Jason film, but not have a priest? Come on, guys. Jason Goes to Hell, it is probably one of the worst Friday the 13th films. If you've seen enough of these, it's just kind of like I just let it go. I just kind of look at it like they're ridiculous. I mean, I knew this was going to be ridiculous, and it's in an awkward place in horror. It would have been interesting to see what they did with Friday the 13th after Scream came out, which is kind of what happened with the Halloween franchise. Friday the 13th didn't get to do that for whatever reason. As someone who's kind of gotten into these films and I like watching them and reviewing them on Friday the 13th, I think you kind of have to loosen up with them. They are always made to be a fun roller coaster ride. This is not really a fun roller coaster ride. It has certain elements that do play into that, but it doesn't really have enough to really make you like, or even why would you want to watch this one again? I mean, this is like a really horribly bad one. It's not really overly 90s. It's like kind of 80s really, which I don't really understand, like why make this in the way they did. It's such an 80s franchise. More of them exist in the 80s than have been made outside of the 80s at this point, at least. I think they didn't really get like what people love about them other than the kills. But if you look at the respect that Sean S. Cunningham is giving the material and Adam Marcus is giving the material, you kind of get why they didn't give a shit. I fault them for it because I wish they'd gotten a director who could have delivered a decent Friday the 13th film, but at this point I don't think there was any way to steer the franchise away from this. It was kind of like going in this direction anyway. So if you have seen Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. So the next film in my Friday the 13th series will actually be Jason X, and that will be on Friday, March 13th. 2015, and there are actually 3 Friday the 13th this year, so you will see more of these than usual. If you would like to check out my previous Friday the 13th reviews, the annotation is below in the Friday the 13th review playlist. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.